Before the story begins, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know. What time do you usually watch videos? And don't forget to suggest the next story or content you'd like to see. Story 1. The Man at the Window. When I was 8 years old, my family lived in an old two-story house on the outskirts of a small rural town. The house was tucked away behind a line of thick pine trees, the kind that creaked when the wind picked up and whispered against the siding during storms. We were far from our nearest neighbor, which made the place feel even more isolated. For the most part, I loved it, especially in summer, when the fields glowed gold under the sun. But there was one thing about the house I dreaded: the big, old-fashioned window in my bedroom. It stretched nearly from floor to ceiling, framed by peeling white paint and thin glass that rattled in heavy wind. My parents said it was part of the house's character. I hated it. The window looked directly over the backyard and the tree line, which seemed to swallow light even on the brightest days. But at night, and especially when it rained, I felt like it was staring back at me. The first time I saw him was on a late autumn evening. Rain had been pouring for hours, and the wind whistled through the eaves. I had been curled up under my blanket, reading by the glow of a small lamp, when a faint tapping drew my attention. At first, I thought it was just a loose branch hitting the glass. But then I looked up and froze. A man was standing outside my window. He was tall and thin, dressed in a dark sodden coat that clung to his body. His hair was plastered to his head from the rain, and water streamed down his pale face. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stared at me through the glass with an expression I still can't describe. It wasn't anger, exactly, nor was it friendliness. It was as if he were trying to memorize me, to drink in every detail of my face. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I yanked the blanket over my head and curled up tight, willing myself to believe I was imagining things. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed before I finally dared to peek. The man was gone. The next morning, I told my parents. They said it was probably a trick of the light, or maybe an animal. People don't just walk up to houses in the middle of a storm, my dad insisted. But a week later, during another downpour, the tapping came again. This time, I was ready. I peeked over my blanket as quietly as I could. He was there again, same dark coat, same dripping hair, same unblinking stare. But now, his lips were moving. I couldn't hear him over the rain, but I could see the faintest shape of the words he mouthed. "Let me in." I screamed. My parents ran upstairs, but by the time they reached my room, the man had vanished again. My dad searched the yard with a flashlight, finding nothing but wet grass and the smell of rain. No footprints, no sign of anyone. Over the next few months, the pattern continued. It only happened during storms, always at night, always with him standing in the same spot outside my window. Sometimes he tapped, sometimes he just stared, and always the words, "Let me in." I stopped sleeping in my room when it rained. I'd camp out on the couch downstairs, or sometimes in my parents' room. But even then, I would swear I could hear faint tapping from somewhere in the house, like he was searching for me. One night in early spring, the rain came down harder than I'd ever heard. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the gutters overflowed with rushing water. I was on the couch, buried under blankets, when my mom shook me awake. She looked pale and panicked. "Did you open the window in your room?" she asked. I shook my head. She didn't say anything else, just hurried upstairs with my dad. I followed. When we reached my bedroom, my stomach dropped. The window was wide open, rain pouring in, puddling on the hardwood floor. The latch wasn't broken. It had been unlocked. My parents searched the house again, but as always, found nothing. That night, they nailed the window shut from the inside. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A month later, another storm rolled in. I lay in bed, clutching a flashlight, forcing myself to stay awake. Around midnight, I heard the tapping, not from my window, but from the living room. Slowly, I crept down the stairs. The front door had a small rectangular pane of frosted glass, and through it, I saw his silhouette, tall, still, dripping wet. He tapped on the glass, and I could see his lips moving again. "Let me in." I screamed for my parents, but when my dad swung the door open, the porch was empty. Just sheets of rain and the sound of water rushing through the gutters. After that, my parents stopped brushing it off. They installed floodlights around the house, motion detectors, even cameras, but every time it rained, the cameras malfunctioned. Static, distortion, or complete blackouts. And every time, I'd hear the tapping somewhere in the house, always followed by those silent, mouthed words. We moved out by the end of that summer. My parents claimed it was because the commute to their jobs was too long. But I know the truth. The new house doesn't have big windows, and I don't sleep near the ground floor anymore. Still, whenever it rains hard enough, I can't help but glance at the glass, half expecting to see that pale face staring back at me, his lips forming the same impossible question. Let me in. Story 2. Footsteps on the porch. It was the dead of winter when I first noticed the sound. My house sat alone at the end of a rural road, surrounded by skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. The nearest neighbor was almost half a mile away, so any sound that wasn't from inside my home always made me pause. That night, just past midnight, I was reading in bed when I heard the faint creak of wooden boards outside. At first, I thought it was the wind, the kind of bitter, cutting wind that slips under your skin, but the sound was too deliberate. Slow, measured steps, the weight shifting with each one. They moved across the porch, toward the front door. I froze, my heart thudding so loudly I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. I kept my bedroom light off, slipped quietly out of bed, and padded to the front window. I pulled back the curtain just a fraction, but the porch was cloaked in shadow. The dim glow from the moon barely touched the snow-covered yard. There was no one. Still, the footsteps continued. Not walking anymore, pacing. Back and forth, the sound of boots pressing down on the warped wooden planks, sometimes pausing for long moments before resuming. I gripped my phone, ready to call the police, but something in me hesitated. If it was just my imagination, I'd feel ridiculous. So I stood there, watching, listening, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, the sound stopped. No retreating steps, no crunch of snow, just silence. I waited another 15 minutes before retreating back to bed. Sleep didn't come easy. The next night, it happened again, and the next. Always around midnight. Always those slow, heavy footsteps pacing the porch. I never caught sight of anyone, no matter how quickly I moved to the window. By the fifth night, I'd had enough. I left my bedroom light on, sat in the living room with the TV muted, and waited. At 12:06, the creaking started. My body tensed. I inched toward the window, careful not to make a sound, and peered out. Nothing. But the boards were groaning under weight. I could hear exactly where the steps were, just feet from the glass. Then, a tap. Soft, but deliberate. It came from the wall just below the window, like knuckles brushing against it. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table. My heart raced so hard I thought I'd pass out. I finally called the sheriff's office. When the deputy arrived 20 minutes later, the porch was empty. No footprints in the snow, no sign that anyone had been there. He gave me the standard small-town assurance, probably just the house settling, ma'am. But houses don't tap. Houses don't pace. The next day, I bought a motion-activated camera and set it up to watch the porch. I slept fitfully that night, both terrified and eager to see the footage. When I reviewed it the next morning, my stomach dropped. At 12:06 a.m., the camera activated. The porch was empty, yet the boards visibly bent and shifted, as though bearing weight. A faint outline, humanoid in shape, flickered in and out, too fast and distorted for the lens to properly capture. And then, it leaned toward the window. The footage ended with the lens shaking violently before the screen went black. That night, the camera didn't turn on at all. But the footsteps came back, louder than before. And this time, when they stopped, I heard the front door handle slowly turn. Story 3. The girl in the yellow coat. I was 13 the first time I saw her. It was late October, the kind of cold, damp day when fog sticks low to the ground and the sun barely shows itself. My family had just moved into an old Victorian house on the edge of town. My parents said it was full of character, but even on the first day, something about it felt off. The windows seemed to watch you, and the walls groaned in the stillness, as if the house was alive and restless. We were unpacking boxes in the living room when I saw movement outside the window. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor, but then I noticed her, a girl about my age, standing on the sidewalk across the street, staring directly at me. She wore a faded yellow coat, buttoned to the neck, with a hood that shadowed part of her face. Her hands hung stiffly at her sides, and her dark hair looked wet, clinging to her cheeks. I told my mom, but by the time she came over, the girl was gone. Mom brushed it off, saying maybe it was someone walking to school, even though school had ended hours earlier. Still, I couldn't shake the image. Something about the way she stared, unblinking, almost as if she was studying me, made my skin prickle. Over the next week, I saw her 3 more times. Once from my bedroom window, standing at the edge of our yard. Once, half hidden behind a telephone pole. And once, closer. That time, she was standing on our porch, directly in front of the door, her face just barely visible through the rippled glass pane. I froze. She didn't knock, didn't say a word. She just stood there until I heard Dad coming down the hall, and then, as if she'd sensed him, she was gone. The strangest part was that my parents never saw her. No matter how fast I called them over, she would vanish before they arrived. One Saturday night, about 2 weeks after moving in, I was lying in bed when I heard something faint, a soft scraping sound like fingernails brushing against wood. I sat up, listening. It came again, a little louder this time, from the wall right beside my bed. I pressed my ear against it. There was definitely movement inside. Slow, deliberate, like someone shifting their weight in a narrow space. I told myself it was just mice, but deep down I knew better. The sound was too big, too deliberate. The next morning, I convinced Dad to check. He shrugged it off, saying old houses made noises, but he opened a small inspection hatch in the attic anyway. The smell that wafted out was damp and stale, like moldy clothes. He shone a flashlight into the dark crawl space and frowned. "There's something here," he muttered. From where I stood, I couldn't see much, just a tangle of insulation and wooden beams, but I caught a glimpse of something pale tucked between the rafters. Dad reached for it and pulled out a small, cracked photograph. It was of a girl in a yellow coat. I felt my stomach drop. She looked exactly the same as the one I'd been seeing. Same wet hair, same hollow eyes. Only the photograph looked old, faded. The edges were curling like it had been sitting there for decades. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Slow, creaking, deliberate steps moving upward toward my room. I held my breath, too scared to call for my parents. The steps stopped right outside my door. Silence. Then, a soft knock. I didn't move. The knock came again, louder this time. When I finally got the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty, but the carpet was wet, as if someone had been standing there in soaked shoes. The next few days blurred together. I barely slept, and every shadow in the house seemed to hold her shape. My parents thought I was making it up, maybe adjusting badly to the move. But then, they heard her too. One night, I woke to my mom screaming. I ran to their bedroom and found both my parents staring at the wall behind their bed. The wallpaper was peeling, but not from age. It looked as if it had been clawed at from the other side. Long, vertical gouges exposed the wooden panel beneath. That was when Dad decided to open the wall. He borrowed tools from the neighbor and cut into the plaster. Dust and mold spilled out, but behind it was a hollow space, a narrow passage running between the walls. And in that passage was something that made my mom stumble backward, covering her mouth. It was a coat, a yellow coat hanging from a rusted nail. The fabric was brittle, and when Dad lifted it, something small and metallic fell out of the pocket. I picked it up before anyone could stop me. It was a key. We never figured out what it unlocked. My parents tried every doormat, every cabinet, every locked drawer in the house. Nothing. We even called a locksmith, but he said it didn't match any modern lock. After that day, I stopped seeing her. No more sightings in the yard, no more footsteps, no more knocking. It was like she'd been released, or maybe she'd gotten whatever she wanted. But sometimes, when the house is especially quiet, I think I still hear her, the faint scrape of fingernails in the walls, just behind my bed. And I know, deep down, she's not gone. She's just waiting for the right time to step out again. Maybe the rain hides more than just the sound of footsteps. It hides the intentions, the faces, and the truths we were never meant to know. So the next time you hear the steady rhythm of drops against your window, ask yourself, is it just the weather? Or has something come back, waiting for you to open the door?